Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when this finds you. Just want to talk a little bit today about uh, something that I, never shared before, but it's historical in context from a guy that many of us have heard of named Frederick Douglass. I'm just going to start off rambling a little bit, and then I'm going to read you some words from a speech he gave, I believe, April 21st, 1845, up in Lynn, Massachusetts, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm going to talk about something in this video that might be a little disturbing for some. And for others, they will just gloss over the information and say we're not there anymore. And for others, they'll take the information and they'll go do some more research. And see, what most Christians don't realize is that the laws put in place by the doctrine of discovery is actually still the law right today. The doctrine of discovery laws are all Christian laws, just in case you didn't know that. The papal bulls from the doctrine of discovery determined that all non-Christians were destined to be perpetual slaves. You see, I told you in another video that our black Hebrew ancestors did not practice Christianity. They were followers of the way. And the Messiah said he was the way. The Messiah never said he was Christian. He said he was the way. Why did all of these pagans do what they could to remove us from the original teachings and assemblies that are taught in the Bible? Why did the church reformers separate from them? The reformers said they separated because the teachings are pagan. And see, I recently lost a cousin who was younger than me, and he was actually hit by a car walking down the street by a drunk driver. And growing up in a family who drank alcohol to excess, I hate alcohol. That's me. Do what you want to do, but I despise alcohol. I'm not going to even lie to you. And my cousin and I had been communicating about doing some videos together on our Hebrew origins and ancestry. And he was well studied in this area. And see, I will talk about what Frederick Douglass felt about Christian with regards to slavery. And see, there are many more areas I'm going to eventually cover at later dates, y'all willing. But for this talk, I'm going to focus on Frederick Douglass. We've been taught that America is a Christian nation, right? We've been taught that the founding fathers were Christians, right? We've been taught that the Bible was the core of this country, right? Well, saying that America is a Christian nation might not be a good thing. Well, might is not the right word. As I continue to study, saying America is a Christian nation is right. But America's foundation is not biblical. As I've stated, many times before, what my mentor has said is with much knowledge comes much grief. And see, just like many of you, I grew up hearing that America was a Christian nation. I heard it so much and I was taught it for so long that I started repeating it myself. And I even would start saying it in conversations I had with people. And I was always asked by doubters, if America was founded as a Christian nation, why did some of the founders own slaves? And see, I could never answer that question back then. I can answer it now. I could answer it years ago. But I'm just now putting it out in a public forum like this. And if you find some value, share it with us, with some other folks. If you find some value, hit the like button. But if you don't find value, don't like it, don't share it. Because as I stated, it's going to upset a lot of people, especially if they're heavily involved in the Christian church. Because that's one thing I was always taught. You don't question the man of God. You don't question the church. And as I mentioned in the other video, you got over 4,000 religions. So ain't nobody teaching the same thing. So I just figure I'm going to go with my Bible. I don't care what the other Christian brothers and sisters do. I'm going to go with the Bible. Now, you can sit there and get caught up with your Christian family and all that stuff and, enjoy your relationships. I'm not saying don't do that. But you better start learning this stuff or just keep living the rest of your life in ignorance. And see, I repeated it. Like I said, I can answer the question now. But when you recognize that there were multitudes of black people here long before those criminal founders showed up with their own agendas and practices, you have to start questioning everything you were taught about the formation of this country from the European perspective. You know, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the original definition of who an American was. See, and you can look this up as well. You know, I came across this years ago. In Webster's dictionary from the year 1828, it actually says the Native of America was originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races. And copper-colored don't mean the people that history has taught you that are the Native Americans. See, you're going to have to go and start studying some biblical stuff. You're going to have to start going and study some travels of them Hebrew brothers and sisters, because in their travels, they went through parts of Asia to come across to the 13 colonies of North, what you know today is North America. And in those travels, they picked up Asian women. And they co-mingled with those Asian women and reproduced children, mixed breeds. And once the mixed breed children grew up and the women and all that got old enough and they felt like their numbers were sufficient, they separated from their black forefathers. And once they separated from the black forefathers, then they claimed that they were the original people in this land when it was already black people here when they got here, and black people brought them here. So you got to go study this. So it's the copper color people that are the Hebrews that were the original people of this land. But let me get back to what I'm talking about, but we have to throw that stuff in there. And it says the copper color people that were actually found here by the Europeans, but now American applies to the descendants of Europeans born in America. So, I mean, listen to that. Europeans changed the definition of who an American is once they got here. They do that everywhere they go. They go and they colonize through evangelization, and then they change everything to fit their agendas, their own personal agendas. And so that just doesn't make sense. And, they did so much destruction to Africa that now, you just had Kamala Harris come from over there trying to get them to accept the homosexual agenda. When Barack Obama was in office, he went over there trying to get them to accept the homosexual agenda. And them presidents over there told them, you get the hell out of our country. My understanding is Kamala Harris offered them $60 million to accept homosexuality. But see, the system is now using this half black face, or whatever you want to call them, Obama and Harris, to go over there and try to push an agenda that whites could never get, or Europeans could never get pushed over there. And see, I keep telling y'all about these so-called black leaders and why they got to always be half black anyway. But Europeans changed the definition of who an American is. Now, the doctrine of discovery said in the year 1823 that Native Americans could not own land. And I've told you who the true natives are. And, this was actually written into U.S. law determining the fate of ownership of Native people, but none of the Native people in the country were included in the decision. Now, those of European descent are always the ones screaming the most about illegal immigration, when history has proven to everybody that they are the original illegal immigrants. So what does all have to do with Christianity? As I asked the question in the video, is Christianity pagan? Show me the way. I asked, is Christianity a pagan religion? Now, I didn't answer the question in that video, but I'm going to answer it here. I have to say yes, based on my study. But in defense of Christianity, really ain't no defense, all religions are pagan in their origin. And see, yeah, that was servitude in the Bible. And this is how many Christians justify what they were doing. They point to Abraham, but Abraham's servants went home at the end of the day. We never see that Abraham beat any of his servants. We never see that Abraham impregnated, his servants and then abandoned them and I take care of them, because you think about Ishmael, Abraham still took care of him. The Bible said he was going to be blessed too. And so Ishmael's descendants have been greatly blessed. And, you understand who Ishmael's descendants are. You didn't understand what I'm talking about. But Abraham's servants went home every day. We see in the book of Exodus that slavery in Egypt, and it was brutal. And that slavery was against black Hebrews or black Israelites, not Jews, as the Christian church continues to teach. Now we see about the brutality of slavery in Deuteronomy, and that defines the actual transatlantic slave trade, not the one in Egypt, because Deuteronomy comes after Exodus. When it talks about the one in Exodus, they left Egypt. When you get to Deuteronomy, specifically chapter 28, they went into Egypt. And so you have to understand, when in Deuteronomy, when it says you're going to go back into Egypt with ships, it's a spiritual place. Egypt means house of bondage. Egypt is not just a physical place in Africa. Egypt means house of bondage. Study that for yourself. And so we see about how the brutality of that was in Deuteronomy. And some people might say, well, you're reaching. No, if you read in Luke 21:24, the Messiah tells of the upcoming transatlantic slave trade in the future. And so I'm going to get into more topics on the Christian slavery and how it's justified, because, there's a verse over in, I believe, Ephesians, if I'm not mistaken, where it says, slaves, obey your masters. But see, you can't just take one verse and try to make the whole Bible irrelevant. You got to start understanding some context and all of that other stuff. So, I'm going to eventually get into that stuff at a later date. And there's another book I bought that I need to read as I continue this journey that I'm on. And the title of that book is called The Two Babylons. I believe the author is, I think his name is Andrew Hislop. But I don't remember. But you can look up The Two Babylons, and I'm pretty sure you can find it if you have an interest. You see, don't get upset with me for telling you the things I'm telling you. I told you in a video I spoke of earlier that Christian wasn't a word until the 16th century. And see, although there was slavery in other parts of the world, there was no slavery in the 13 colonies until the 16th century. Isn't it amazing? We got slavery in the colonies in the 16th century at around the same time that Christian became a word. I mean, now, there was slavery in other parts of the world before then, but I'm just saying the only place that's ever been declared a Christian nation them founders came over here and owned slaves. So, I'm not going to dwell on that too much here. But, history teaches us that slavery started when those first 20s indentured servants came off the ship in 1619 up in Jamestown. But their records show it goes back almost a full century, and that means it goes back to the 16th century. And those Christian founders were participants in that system. They only wanted freedom for themselves. There was no slavery before their ancestors came to the colonies. They brought that mentality with them. We heard about building a more perfect union to ensure domestic tranquility. And, that was so ingrained in us in school that I can still remember that stuff, because we had to recite that stuff, learn, contribute that stuff to memory, and then get up in front of the class and say speeches like that. The full speech, full Declaration of Independence and all of that stuff. And see, the perfect union they created was for Europeans to control everything and for blacks to be subservient. And see, the founders said they wanted a nation based on individual freedom and self-government. But the native black Americans already had individual freedom and self-government long before those real thugs got here. I call them thugs. The invaders were so poor that they had to find a way to gain wealth, and slavery was that vehicle for them. The black people who were already here actually accepted those foreign invaders with open arms. And how did those thugs repay them? They enslaved them after getting them sick because of all them diseases they brought over here. History has taught us about Thomas Jefferson, Mr. Freedom himself, Mr. All Men Are Created, Mr. Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. But Thomas Jefferson owned 609 slaves. So he didn't mean that for black people. He meant that for Europeans only. This dude was so disgusted he even enslaved his own children that he produced with Sally Hemings. Now many slave owners did this after they raped these women. Now, I'll say in Jefferson's defense that the original draft of the Declaration actually included language in it for the abolition of slavery, and it was actually struck down. And give you a hint on who struck it down. Who do your pastors and all your Christian churches keep telling you to stand with? I'll just say the 1948 people. They had it taken out of there. And Jefferson didn't have anything to do with the rest of the. He got overruled by a majority, not all of them, but a majority. So that was removed. And see, amazingly, the country's founding documents are actually known as the Charters of Freedom. But who was the freedom for? See, those black folks were already free before those thugs came over here. Charters of freedom, but were created while the nation continued to maintain slavery. Now, you talk about hypocrites. So, is this what Christians did back then? The answer is yes. I stated that history taught us that it was Christians who fought for the abolishment of slavery, and some did. However, most of your defenders of freedom just happen to be atheists and non-believers. Now, we have a better understanding of why atheists despise Christianity. Because atheists weren't enslaving black people. Christians were. Christianity is oppressive. And it was actually designed to be that way. That's why we're so ingrained in it and we can't come from under that teaching. Because the teaching is doing exactly what it was designed to do. To indoctrinate us and make us never question, because they utilize the Bible to teach us Christianity. But Christianity is not the original teaching. And like I said, don't get mad at me. Get mad at the people who taught you this and who kept pushing this stuff on you and who still push this stuff today. Like I said, my idea was to never dispute Christianity, but the more I research, I'm like, man, this is some oppressive stuff these people did and still doing today, just in different ways. I mean, it's sickening. Get mad at the people who lied to you. Get mad at the people who misled you. Get mad at the people who still mislead you. And see, we better get back to the original teaching of the Bible. And Christianity ain't it. Christianity is a Eurocentric, Hellenized version of the Bible. And see, how can I say that? Well, I'm going to read you something from Acts 6:1. Give me a second. In Acts 6:1 it says, "Now about this time, when the number of the disciples was greatly increasing, complaint was made by the Hellenists, the Greek-speaking Jews, against the native Hebrews because their widows were being overlooked and neglected in the daily ministration, distribution of relief." And see, that's the end of that. The believers were actually divided into two groups in that passage. There were those who had remained in Judea, near Jerusalem, and they actually used the Hebrew language, and they were actually called, rightfully so, Hebrews. And the other group were actually those who were scattered among Gentiles, and they spoke the Greek language. They used the Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint. Now, these were called Hellenists. That's from a word. It's a Greek or Gentile, Greek-speaking Gentile word, whatever you want to call, means to adopt Greek culture and ideas. Hello. You see how they made a distinction between Jews and Hebrews? But remember this, Jew was not a word until 1875. So, we've been taught about the Lincoln-Douglas debate. But for me personally, I never saw any of the words of Frederick Douglass, for the most part, on Christian slave owners. Now, the crazy thing is, I've had this information for 10 years. I was going through some notes the other day, and I said, man, I put this stuff in a file back in 2013, and I guess I just never got back to it because almost on a daily basis, I create new notes of stuff I want to study. And so I can't speak for anybody else. I'm just speaking on my behalf. I can't speak on what the rest of you were taught. I'm just talking about what I was taught. So with a little research, I found out about, some of Douglas' words. And I'm going to read it to you. I hate reading, but this is so profound. And, just bear with me, please. But this is what Frederick Douglass said in that speech. "Were I to be again reduced to chains of slavery, next to that enslavement, I should regard being the slave of a religious master the greatest calamity that could befall me. I hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-stripping, cradle-plundering, partial and hypocritical Christianity of this land." What I have said respecting and against religion, I mean strictly to apply to the slave-holding religion of this land, and with no possible reference to Christianity proper. For between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference. So wide that to receive the one as good, pure, and holy is of necessity to reject the other as bad, corrupt, and wicked. To be the friend of the one is of necessity to be the enemy of the other. I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of this land. Indeed, I can see no reason but the most deceitful one for calling the religion of this land Christianity. I look upon it as the climax of all misnomers, the boldest of all frauds, and the grossest of all libels. Never was there a clearer case of stealing the library of the court of heaven to serve the devil in. I am filled with unutterable loathing when I contemplate the religious pomp and show, together with the horrible inconsistencies which everywhere surround me. We have men stealers for ministers, women whippers for missionaries, and cradle plunderers for church members. The man who wields the blood-clotted cowskin during the week fills the pulpit on Sunday and claims to be a minister of the meek and lowly Jesus. The man who robs me of my earnings at the end of each week meets me as a class leader on Sunday morning to show me the way of life and the path of salvation. He who sells my sister for purposes of prostitution stands forth as the pious advocate of purity. He who proclaims it a religious duty to read the Bible denies me the right of learning to read the name of God who made me. He who is a religious advocate of marriage robs whole millions of its sacred influence and leaves them to the ravages of wholesale pollution. The warm defender of the sacredness of the family relation is the same that scatters whole families, sundering husbands and wives, parents and children, sisters and brothers, leaving a hut vacant and a hearth desolate. We see the thief preaching against theft and the adulterer against adultery. We have men sold to build churches, women sold to support the gospel, and babes sold to purchase Bible for the poor heathen, all for the glory of God and the good of souls. The slave auctioners Baal, and the church-going Baal chime in with each other, and the bitter cries of the heartbroken slave are drowned in the religious shouts of his pious master. Revival of religion and revivals in the slave trade go hand in hand together. The slave prison and the church stand near each other. The clanking of fetters and the rattling of chains in the prison, and the pious psalm and solemn prayer in the church may be heard at the same time. The dealers in the bodies and souls of men erect their stand in the presence of the pulpit, and they mutually help each other. The dealer gives his blood-stained gold to support the pulpit, and the pulpit in return covers his infernal business with the garb of Christianity. Here we have religion and robbery, the allies of each other. Devils dressed in angels' robes, and hell presenting the semblance of paradise. The Christianity of America is a Christianity of whose votaries it may be as truly said as it was of the ancient scribes and Pharisees. They bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. All their works they do for men to be seen of men. They love the uppermost rooms at feasts and the chief seats in the synagogues, and to be called of men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye shut up the kingdom of heaven. Dark and terrible as is this picture, I hold it to be strictly true of the overwhelming mass of professed Christians in America. They strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. Could anything be more true of our churches? They will be shocked at the proposition of fellowship with a sheep stealer, and at the same time they hug to their communion a man stealer and brand me with being an infidel if I find fault with them for it. They attend with pharisaical strictness to the outward forms of religion, and at the same time neglect the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. They are always ready to sacrifice, but seldom to show mercy. They who are represented as professing to love God whom they have not seen, whilst they hate their brother whom they have seen. They love the heathen on the other side of the globe. They can pray for him, pay money to have the Bible put into his hand, and missionaries to instruct him, while they despise and totally neglect the heathen at their own doors. Such is, very briefly, my view of the religion of this land. And to avoid any misunderstanding, growing out of the use of general terms, I mean the religion of this land, that which is revealed in the words, deeds, and actions of those bodies, north and south, calling themselves Christian churches, and yet in union with slaveholders. It is against religion, as presented by these bodies, that I have felt it my duty to justify. I'm not through. I just needed to take a break. As Frederick Douglass had a lot to say, hopefully I'll be through shortly. Let me continue. I assert most unhesitatingly that the religion of the South is a mere covering for the most horrid crimes, a justifier of the most appalling barbarity, a sanctifier of the most hateful frauds, and a dark shelter under which the darkest, foulest, grossest, and most infernal deeds of slaveholders find the strongest protection. Were I to be again reduced to the chains of slavery, next to that enslavement, I should regard being the slave of a religious master the greatest calamity that could befall me. I hate, let me say that again, I hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of this land. And then he said this, he was actually saying that slave owners who became Christians actually became worse masters. And when you tell me that there are some Christian slaveholders in the States, I tell you, as well might you talk of sober drunkards, just as if the lash in the hands of a Christian is not as injurious to my back as it would be in the hands of a wicked man. As far as my experience goes, I would rather suffer under the hands of the latter. And I tell you, as I have mentioned in my narrative, that next to being a slave, there's no greater calamity than being a slave of a Christian slaveholder. I say this from my own experience. Some persons have taken offense at my saying that slaveholders become worse after their conversion. And Douglass, he pointed out that, all Southern Baptists were in favor of slavery, because any who actually were in favor of abolition, they were actually thrown out of the church. I mean, what? You were thrown out of the church if you were in favor of freedom for black people? As a side note, do a little research and find out the background of all of the mayors of many of those southern states. And we run around here acting all chummy with that group of people right today. And like I said, I give you a hint, just study 1948. But let me read some more of what Douglass had to say. I beg now to introduce to your notice a little of the doings of one or two of the churches of America. And I shall begin with the Baptist Church. This church is congregational in its organization and government, but its congregations are united by what is called a triennial convention, the object of which is to spread the gospel among the heathen. At the last but one of these conventions in the city of Baltimore, the Reverend Dr. Johnston of South Carolina presided, and he on this occasion asserted the doctrine that when any institution becomes established by law, a Christian man may innocently engage to uphold it. The president of the Baptist Convention is a slaveholder himself. He is a man stealer. The secretary of the convention is another man stealer. And most of the other office bearers were man stealers. They were thieves. During the progress of business, there was one man in one of the committees who was found to be an abolitionist, Elon Galusha. This man is now, I trust, in heaven. He dared to say that a slave was a man and slavery ought to be abolished. For this, the members of his church cut him off, though he was a man of talent and of unblemished character, and as a minister of the gospel, unparalleled. Another great Baptist minister, the Reverend Lucius Boyles, congratulated his brethren that there was a pleasing degree of unity among the Baptists through the land, for the southern brethren were all slaveholders. Now, I'm going to finish this off. This is the last thing I got from that speech, and I'm going to finish up with that. Because the Baptists, Southern Baptists, I believe, apologized for their role in slavery back in, I believe, 1995. And who was that? Somebody apologized in 2007. But right to this day, the Catholic Church still never apologized. They still trying to hide their participation with everything. But I'm gonna read this and close it out. I have now to speak of them in the state of Virginia, where men regularly enter into the raising or breeding of slaves as a business, just as cattle are raised for the Smithfield market, and where the marriage institution is set aside. In some cases, it becomes the interest of the slaveholder to separate two slaves, male and female, already married. When the question was proposed to the Baptist Society there, whether parties thus separated might marry again, the answer was that this separation being tantamount to the civil death of either of the parties, to forbid the second marriage in either case would be to expose to church censure those who did so for disobedience. Here we find a deliberate setting aside of the marriage institution and a deliberate sanction of a wholesale system of adultery and concubinage. And yet, the persons who authorize and enforce such wickedness call themselves Christians. That's really sick. Sound like Frederick Douglass was a little ticked off with Christianity. Have a good day.